They thought she was broken. They thought she was alone. The Kingsley family invited Mitchell Owens back into their world for one reason only, to watch her fade beside the life she had lost. Olivia Kingsley, the cruel matriarch, even arranged a seat for Mitchell far from the family, close enough to see everything but far enough to belong nowhere. But Olivia made one fatal mistake. She didn't know Mitchell wasn't coming alone. When Mitchell arrived at that glittering celebration, she didn't arrive in shame. She arrived with two identical boys carrying Harry Kingsley's face, his eyes, his entire legacy. And the secret she's been hiding for 5 years is about to shatter this perfect family gathering forever. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and stay with us till the end of this journey. Thank you for being here. Mitchell Owens stood before her bedroom mirror, smoothing the front of her red dress with steady hands. The fabric was simple but elegant, nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed for attention. That wasn't her style anymore. She had learned years ago that real power didn't announce itself with diamonds and designer labels. Real power walked quietly into a room and changed everything without saying a word. Behind her, reflected in the mirror, two identical boys sat cross-legged on her bed, their dark hair freshly combed, their matching gray suits making them look like miniature businessmen. Paul was adjusting Peter's collar with the serious concentration of a 5-year-old who had been told this was important. Peter squirmed but allowed it, his eyes darting between his brother and their mother. "Mom," Paul said, his voice carrying that particular tone children use when they've been thinking about something for too long, "why are we getting so dressed up?" Mitchell turned to face them, her heart doing that familiar squeeze it always did when she looked at her sons. They were beautiful, not just in the way all mothers think their children are beautiful, but objectively, undeniably striking. They had inherited the best of both parents, her delicate features softened by Harry's strong jawline, her warm brown eyes lightened to an unusual hazel that seemed to shift between gold and green depending on the light. But it was their expressions that really marked them as Harry's children. That slight furrow between their eyebrows when they concentrated, that half-smile that pulled more to the left than the right, even the way they tilted their heads when asking questions. Anyone who had ever met Harry Kingsley would recognize his sons immediately. And that was exactly what Mitchell was counting on. "We're going to a party," she said, kneeling down so she was at their eye level. "A fancy one with lots of people." "Will there be cake?" Peter asked hopefully. He was always thinking about food. "Probably," Mitchell said, reaching out to smooth a stubborn cowlick in his hair. "But that's not why we're going." "Then why?" Paul pressed. He was the more persistent of the two, the one who needed to understand the reasoning behind everything. Mitchell took a breath. She had practiced this conversation in her head a dozen times over the past week, ever since the cream-colored envelope had arrived with her name written in Olivia Kingsley's perfect calligraphy. Even seeing that handwriting had made her hands shake, transporting her back 5 years to a different version of herself. A smaller version. A version who had allowed herself to be diminished by people who should have loved her. "Do you remember when you asked me about your father?" she said carefully. Both boys went very still. They had asked, of course. Children always asked. And Mitchell had always answered honestly, that their father was a good man who had made some mistakes, that he didn't know about them, that someday when the time was right, things might change. "Is he going to be at the party?" Paul whispered. "Yes," Mitchell said simply, "and his family, including his mother." "Our grandmother," Peter's eyes went wide. "Technically," Mitchell's voice went cool, "but Peter, I need you to listen to me very carefully. These people, they're not like the families you see in your storybooks. They're complicated, and some of them," she paused, choosing her words with surgical precision, "some of them said things to me a long time ago that weren't very kind." "Then why are we going?" Paul's eyebrows drew together, his protective instincts already kicking in despite his age. Mitchell smiled then, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 5 years building herself back up from nothing, who had worked 2 jobs while pregnant with twins, who had finished her degree while nursing Bobbies at 2 in the morning, who had turned her tiny freelance design hobby into a thriving firm that now employed 15 people. It was the smile of someone who had already won, but was about to collect her prize. "Because sometimes," she said, "people need to be reminded of who they forgot to respect." The invitation had arrived exactly 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when Mitchell was working from her home office, design sketches spread across her desk like a paper garden. Paul and Peter were at kindergarten. The house was quiet, and she had been deep in concentration when the doorbell rang. The postman handed her the envelope personally, which should have been her first warning. Regular mail came through the slot. Hand-delivered envelopes that required a signature meant something formal, something important. She had recognized the return address immediately: the Kingsley Estate, Riverside Manor. Her hands had actually trembled as she held it. 5 years of carefully constructed peace had whooshed out of her lungs in a single moment, replaced by the old familiar knot of anxiety that living with the Kingsley family had made her constant companion. She had almost thrown it away without opening it, almost. But curiosity, or perhaps some deeper instinct for self-preservation, made her slide her finger under the seal. The card inside was embossed, expensive, the kind of stationery that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. The message was simple: "Mrs. Mitchell Owens, you are cordially invited to the Kingsley family annual celebration. We would be honored by your presence as we gather to commemorate another year of family legacy and achievement. Saturday, May 18th, 6:00 p.m. Formal attire. RSVP regrets only. Olivia Kingsley." Mitchell had read it 3 times, looking for the catch. There was no mention of why she was being invited, no explanation for why, after 5 years of absolute silence, the Kingsley family suddenly wanted her at their exclusive annual gathering. No acknowledgement that the last time Mitchell had stood in Olivia's presence, the older woman had told her she was a burden, a mistake, a common girl who would never be worthy of the Kingsley name. But Mitchell knew Olivia Kingsley. She had spent 2 years married to her son, living under her roof, enduring her subtle cruelties disguised as concern, and she knew exactly what this invitation meant. It was a summons to her own execution. Olivia wanted to parade her in front of society, wanted to show everyone what had become of poor, fragile Mitchell Owens, the girl who couldn't hold onto a Kingsley, who had run away when marriage got difficult, who was probably struggling now, alone and forgotten. Mitchell could picture it perfectly. Herself seated at some distant table, watching Harry with whatever new life he'd built, watching Olivia hold court, watching the guests whisper and pity her. The old Mitchell, the one who had left this family 5 years ago, pregnant and terrified and convinced she deserved their contempt, would have thrown the invitation away and tried to forget it existed. But Mitchell wasn't that person anymore. She had looked at that invitation for a long time, her mind calculating angles and possibilities. Then she had walked to her son's bedroom, where photos of them covered nearly every surface. Paul and Peter as Bobbies, as toddlers at their first day of school, blowing out birthday candles, covered in paint from art class, asleep in a tangle of blankets. In every photo, Harry Kingsley's features looked back at her. And Mitchell had made her decision. She had called her assistant, asked her to clear her Saturday evening schedule, and then she had written one word on the RSVP card: attending. No explanation, no questions, just that single word loaded with 5 years of silence and the weight of everything Olivia Kingsley didn't know. Now, standing in her bedroom with her sons dressed and ready, Mitchell felt that same cold certainty settle over her. This wasn't about revenge. She had moved past revenge years ago, in therapy sessions where she'd learned to separate her worth from other people's treatment of her, in quiet moments rocking her Bobbies, and realizing she had given them a better start than she'd had, in the simple daily victory of building a life she was proud of. This was about something simpler and more profound. This was about being seen. "Time to go," she said, extending her hands to her sons. They took them without hesitation, their small fingers wrapping around hers with complete trust. Peter grabbed his favorite toy car from the nightstand. He never went anywhere without it, and Paul straightened his shoulders in unconscious imitation of Mitchell's own posture. As they walked down the stairs of the modest but comfortable townhouse Mitchell had worked so hard to buy, she caught sight of their reflection in the hallway mirror. A mother and her sons, dressed for a party, looking like any other family on any other Saturday evening. Except they weren't any other family. And tonight wasn't any other evening. Mitchell paused at the door, her hand on the knob, suddenly struck by the magnitude of what she was about to do. Once she walked into that celebration with Paul and Peter, there would be no going back. The secret she had protected for 5 years would detonate in the middle of the Kingsley family gathering like a bomb, and the fallout would change everything. For her, for her sons, for Harry. Even for Olivia. "Mom," Paul looked up at her, sensing her hesitation. "Are you okay?" Mitchell looked down at him, at his serious little face so full of concern for her, and felt her resolve harden into something unbreakable. These boys deserved to exist in the world without shame, without secrecy, without the shadow of their grandmother's cruelty hanging over them. They deserved a father who would fight for them. They deserved recognition, legitimacy, protection. And Mitchell had spent 5 years making sure she was strong enough to demand all of those things on their behalf. "I'm perfect," she said, and opened the door. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. Mitchell's car, a practical sedan, nothing flashy, waited in the driveway. She buckled Paul and Peter into their booster seats, checking the straps twice even though they protested they were big enough to do it themselves. "It's far away," Peter observed as they pulled out of the driveway. "The party place." "About an hour," Mitchell confirmed, navigating through their quiet neighborhood toward the highway. "You can play your game if you want." But neither boy reached for the tablet Mitchell kept in the car for long drives. Instead, they pressed their faces to the windows, watching the familiar streets give way to unfamiliar ones, the modest houses of their neighborhood replaced by increasingly grand estates as they drove into the wealthy enclave where the Kingsley family had built their empire. "Mom," Paul said as they passed a particularly enormous mansion surrounded by iron gates, "our dad is rich." Mitchell's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "His family has money, yes. But not you." "I have everything I need," Mitchell said firmly. "I have you too, I have work I love, I have a home that's ours. That's more than enough." "But Grandma," Peter started, then stopped, working through some complicated thought process. "If she's rich, why didn't she help you when you were married to Dad?" Mitchell felt something crack in her chest. Her sons were only 5, but they were frighteningly perceptive, already picking up on the undercurrents she tried so hard to keep from them. "Because Grandma didn't think I was good enough," Mitchell said quietly. "There was no point in lying. They would figure it out eventually. She thought your father should have married someone from a family like his, someone wealthy, someone different than me." "That's mean," Paul said flatly. "Yes," Mitchell agreed, "it was." "Is that why you left?" Mitchell glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Paul's eyes. They were so much like Harry's in that moment, analytical, searching, trying to make sense of adult complications that had no good explanations. "I left because I needed to protect you," she said. "Both of you. I found out I was pregnant right after your grandma told me that if I ever had children, she would make sure I wasn't fit to raise them. She said she would take them away from me and give them to your father and a more suitable mother." The silence in the car was absolute. "She said that," Peter's voice was small, shocked. "She did, and your father. Mitchell paused, old grief rising up before she pushed it back down. Your father didn't stop her. He didn't defend me. He loved his mother more than he loved me, and I knew that if I stayed, she would find a way to take you from me. So I left before anyone knew you existed. Did Dad know about us at all? Paul asked. No, Mitchell said. I didn't tell him. Maybe that was wrong, maybe it was right, I don't know, but I made the choice I thought would keep you safe. They drove in silence for several minutes, the cityscape giving way to countryside, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Mom, Paul said finally, when Dad sees us tonight, what's going to happen? Mitchell took a breath. I don't know, baby, but whatever happens, I want you to remember that none of this is your fault. You are wanted, you are loved, and you have every right to exist exactly as you are. Even if Grandma is mean, Peter asked. Especially if Grandma is mean, Mitchell said fiercely, because her opinions don't define you. They never did and they never will. As they turned onto the long driveway that led to Riverside Manor, Mitchell felt her heartbeat accelerate. The estate rose before them like something from a period drama, 3 stories of gray stone and elegant windows, surrounded by manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than Mitchell's entire annual salary. This had been her home once. For 2 years, she had walked these halls, trying to make herself smaller and quieter and more acceptable. She had learned which rooms Olivia frequented so she could avoid them. She had memorized Harry's schedule so she could time her meals to match his, desperate for any moment of connection with the husband who seemed increasingly like a stranger. She had endured 1,000 small humiliations, each one eroding her sense of self a little more, until the day she woke up and barely recognized her own face in the mirror. But that was a long time ago. Mitchell parked among the rows of expensive cars, BMWs and Mercedes and at least 2 Bentleys, and turned to face her sons. Ready? She asked. They nodded, solemn and brave and so heartbreakingly trusting. Mitchell stepped out of the car, smoothed her dress one final time and opened the back doors. Paul and Peter climbed out, each taking one of her hands again. Together, the 3 of them walked toward the massive front entrance, where light and music spilled out into the twilight. At the door, a young man in a black suit checked their names against a list. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the twins, his gaze darting between them and Mitchell with barely concealed curiosity, but he said nothing, just stepped aside to let them enter. The foyer was exactly as Mitchell remembered it. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, a grand staircase sweeping upward, except now it was filled with people. Guests in evening wear clustered in elegant groups, champagne glasses in hand, their laughter and conversation creating a sophisticated buzz that felt designed to exclude anyone who didn't belong. And for just a moment, Mitchell felt herself shrink, felt that old instinct to make herself invisible kick in. Then Paul squeezed her hand, and she remembered why she was here. She lifted her chin and walked forward. The first person to notice them was an older woman Mitchell vaguely recognized from her marriage, one of Olivia's society friends. The woman's eyes went wide, her mouth forming a small O of surprise as she took in Mitchell and the 2 boys flanking her. Then another person noticed, and another. Conversation began to falter, dying away in ripples as more and more guests turned to stare at the unexpected arrival. Mitchell kept walking, moving through the crowd with Paul and Peter at her sides, heading toward the grand ballroom where she knew Olivia would be holding court. And then suddenly there she was. Olivia Kingsley, still beautiful at 65, her silver hair styled perfectly, her champagne-colored gown probably costing more than Mitchell's car. She stood surrounded by admirers, laughing at something someone had said, the picture of grace and breeding and casual cruelty. She hadn't seen Mitchell yet. But Harry had. He was standing near his mother, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire, a glass of scotch in his hand, and his eyes had locked onto Mitchell with an expression of absolute shock. Then his gaze dropped to Paul and Peter, and every ounce of color drained from his face. Mitchell stopped walking. She didn't need to move any closer. She simply stood there, one hand holding Paul's, one hand holding Peter's, and waited. Let him look. Let him see what 5 years in fear and Olivia's cruelty had hidden from him. Let him see his sons. Around them, the ballroom had gone completely silent. Every single person was staring now, their eyes moving between Harry and the twins, registering the impossible, undeniable resemblance. Olivia finally noticed the disturbance. She turned, irritation crossing her features, ready to demand an explanation for why her perfect celebration had been interrupted. Then she saw Mitchell. For one brilliant, terrible moment, their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Mitchell watched understanding dawn on Olivia's face. Watched the older woman's gaze drop to the twins. Watched her face go from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like fear. And Mitchell smiled. Not a happy smile, not a triumphant smile. Just a quiet, knowing smile that said, "You invited me here to humiliate me, but I'm the one holding all the cards now." Paul, sensing the weight of the moment, looked up at his mother. "Mom," he whispered, "which one is our dad?" And in the perfect, crystalline silence of that elegant ballroom, Mitchell pointed directly at Harry Kingsley and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That one, sweetheart, that's your father." The silence that followed Mitchell's declaration lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. Every person in that ballroom stood frozen, champagne glasses suspended midair, conversations dying on their lips, all eyes locked on the impossible tableau. Mitchell Owens, standing tall and composed, with two identical boys who were undeniably, unmistakably Harry Kingsley's children. Then, like a dam breaking, the whispers began. "Those boys. They look exactly like. How old do you think they are?" Harry didn't know. 5 years she's been gone. My God, they have his eyes. The whispers built into a crescendo, a wave of shocked speculation that crashed over the room. Mitchell stood perfectly still in the center of it all, one hand holding Paul's, one hand holding Peter's, an island of calm in the chaos she deliberately created. Harry hadn't moved. He was still standing where he dropped his glass, scotch spreading across the marble floor around his feet, his face a mask of absolute devastation. He stared at the twins like a man seeing ghosts, his chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. "Harry," Olivia's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "Harry, what is the meaning of this?" But Harry didn't seem to hear her. He took one stumbling step forward, then another, drawn toward the twins like a magnet. His eyes were wet, Mitchell noticed, with some distant part of herself. Harry Kingsley, who never cried, who had been raised to believe emotions were weakness, had tears streaming down his face. His voice cracked. They're nothing," Olivia said sharply, finally recovering from her initial shock. She stepped forward, her champagne-colored gown swirling around her, her face arranged in an expression of aristocratic disdain. "Harry, don't be absurd. This woman disappeared 5 years ago without a word. Now she shows up with children and expects us to believe." "Look at them, Mother." Harry's voice was raw, broken. "Just look at them." Olivia did look, and Mitchell saw something flicker behind her carefully maintained mask. Fear, maybe, or recognition she didn't want to acknowledge. "Resemblance proves nothing," Olivia said coldly. "This is clearly an elaborate scheme to extort money from our family. I should have known she'd try something like this eventually. That's what people like her do. They see an opportunity in." "People like me?" Mitchell's voice was quiet, but it cut through Olivia's tirade with surgical precision. "Please, Olivia, tell everyone what you mean by that." Olivia's lips thinned. "I mean opportunistic, common, the kind of person who would use children as weapons." "The way you used your son as a weapon against me?" Mitchell asked evenly. The way you wielded your money and status like a club to beat me down every single day I was part of this family." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. No one spoke to Olivia Kingsley that way. No one dared. But Mitchell had spent 5 years building a life without the Kingsley name, without their money, without their approval. She had nothing left to lose. "How dare you?" Olivia began. "Mom," Peter's small voice interrupted, confused and frightened by the tension. He looked up at Mitchell with wide eyes. "Why is everyone staring at our dad?" The room went absolutely silent again. Those 7 words, innocent, honest, from a child who knew nothing of adult complications, hit harder than any accusation Mitchell could have made. Because Paul had said our dad, not that man or the man in the suit. Our dad, claiming Harry with the simple certainty of a child stating a fact. Harry made a sound like he'd been punched. His knees actually buckled, and he caught himself on the edge of a nearby table, his expensive suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. "Harry, pull yourself together," Olivia hissed. "This is a performance, can't you see that? She's coached these children to." "I haven't coached them to do anything except tell the truth," Mitchell said, her voice still eerily calm. "Paul, Peter, what did I tell you in the car?" Paul looked up at her, then at the crowd of staring adults. "You said our father is a good man who made mistakes, and that we have his eyes." "And his nose," Peter added helpfully. "And his chin. You said we look exactly like him when he was little." The whispers erupted again, louder now. People were pulling out phones, probably searching for childhood photos of Harry Kingsley, comparing them mentally to the twins standing in front of them. "This is absurd," Olivia snapped, though Mitchell could hear the first hints of panic creeping into her voice. "Harry, say something. Tell her she's making this up." But Harry had finally moved. He'd crossed the distance between them, dropping to his knees on the marble floor directly in front of the twins, not caring that his expensive trousers were in the spilled scotch, not caring that every person in the ballroom was watching. He studied their faces with an intensity that bordered on desperate, his trembling hands reaching out, then pulling back, uncertain if he had the right to touch them. "You have my eyes," he whispered, and his voice was destroyed. "My God, you have my exact eyes, and your chin that's my father's chin. My father had that exact same." "Don't," Olivia said sharply. "Harry, don't do this. She could have gotten children who look similar and—" "Mother, stop." Harry didn't look away from the twins. "Just stop. I know my own features. I've seen pictures of myself at this age. These boys aren't similar. They're identical." "Genetic testing," Olivia said, grasping at straws. "We need genetic testing before anyone makes claims about." "I have it." Everyone turned to stare at Mitchell. She calmly reached into her small purse and pulled out a USB drive. "DNA results from a certified laboratory. Paternity established at 99.97% probability. I had it done when they were born, using samples from Harry's family medical records that were on file at the clinic where I went for fertility treatments during our marriage. Everything is documented, dated, legally certified. Would you like me to project it on your ballroom wall, Olivia? Give everyone here a scientific lesson in genetics." Olivia's face went white, then red with fury. "You stole medical records. That's illegal. I'll have you arrested for—" "Actually, they were my medical records too," Mitchell said smoothly. "Wives have access to family medical files. I'm sure you remember. You insisted Harry and I both have complete genetic panels done before the wedding. Something about ensuring the Kingsley bloodline remained pure." The last word dripped with disdain. The crowd was openly murmuring now, phones out, some people clearly texting others or posting on social media. The Kingsley family scandal was going viral in real time, and there was nothing Olivia could do to stop it. "Dr. Morrison," Olivia suddenly called out, her voice sharp. "Dr. Morrison, you're here, aren't you?" An older man in a tuxedo pushed through the crowd, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mitchell recognized him vaguely, the Kingsley family physician, someone who'd been treating the family for decades. "Olivia, I don't think," he began. "Look at these children," Olivia commanded. "Tell me if they carry the Kingsley marker." Dr. Morrison looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, but he approached the twins slowly, pulling reading glasses from his pocket. "Boys, may I look at your eyes for just a moment?" Paul and Peter looked to Mitchell, who nodded permission. The doctor knelt down, gently tilting each boy's face toward the light. He studied their eyes carefully, particularly the irises, then sat back with a heavy sigh. "Well," Olivia demanded. Dr. Morrison stood, removing his glasses slowly. "The Kingsley heterochromia, central heterochromia with a distinctive starburst pattern around the pupil. It's a rare genetic trait that runs in your family, Olivia. Your father had it. You have a variant of it. Harry has it. And both of these boys have the exact same pattern." "That could be coincidence," Olivia protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "The pattern is genetically unique to your family line," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "I've been documenting it for 40 years. The probability of two unrelated children having this exact variant is astronomically small, effectively impossible." The room exploded. People weren't even trying to whisper anymore. They were talking openly, pointing, some taking photos despite the obvious breach of etiquette. The Kingsley family celebration had transformed into a circus, and Olivia's carefully constructed facade was crumbling with each passing second. "This is your fault," Olivia suddenly turned on Mitchell, her composure finally shattering. "You did this deliberately. You hid these children from their father, from their family, from their legacy, all so you could have this moment, this public humiliation. You wanted revenge, and you're using innocent children to—" "I hid them to protect them," Mitchell said, and for the first time her voice rose, not to a shout but loud enough to carry through the ballroom, cutting through the noise. "I hid them because the last time I saw you, Olivia, you told me that if I ever got pregnant you would take my child away from me. You said I was unfit to be a mother. You said I was too weak, too unstable, too common to raise a Kingsley heir. You threatened me." The room went silent again. "I never," Olivia began. "You did." Mitchell's voice shook now, not with fear but with 5 years of suppressed rage finally finding release. "It was at dinner, 3 months before I left. I'd had a miscarriage the week before, early, barely 6 weeks along, and you told me it was probably for the best, that I obviously wasn't strong enough to carry a Kingsley child. And then you looked me dead in the eye and said that if I ever did manage to have a baby, you would make sure the courts understood I was mentally unstable. That you had documentation of my emotional episodes. That you would take my child and give them to Harry and a more suitable mother." Harry's head snapped up. "She said that to you?" "She said a lot of things to me," Mitchell said, finally looking at him. "Things you never heard because you were never there. You were always at the office or with your mother or anywhere but standing between me and her cruelty." "Mitchell, do you know when I found out I was pregnant with the twins?" Mitchell continued, and tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. 2 days after that dinner, 2 days after your mother threatened to take my baby, I went to the doctor and they told me I was carrying twins, and instead of joy, all I felt was terror. Because I knew that if I stayed, she would find a way to make good on that threat. "I would have protected you," Harry said desperately. "No, you wouldn't have." Mitchell's voice was gentle but devastating. "You never did before. Why would it have been different?" Harry flinched like she'd slapped him. "So I left," Mitchell said. "I packed one bag and I left, and I spent 5 years building a life where my children would be safe from manipulation and threats and the toxic environment you call a family. I worked 2 jobs while pregnant. I finished my degree while nursing newborns. I built my own business from nothing. And I never, not once, asked the Kingsley family for a single dollar." "You should have told me," Harry whispered. "You should have given me a chance to." "To what?" Mitchell's laugh was bitter. "To choose between your mother and your children. We both know how that would have ended, Harry. You chose your mother over your wife every single day we were married." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Olivia finally found her voice again. "If you're so independent, if you need nothing from us, then why come here at all? Why bring them?" Mitchell turned to face her fully, and when she spoke, her voice was cold as winter. "Because you invited me. You invited me here to humiliate me, didn't you, Olivia? You wanted to show society what had become of poor, pathetic Mitchell Owens. You wanted to parade me in front of everyone as proof that you were right, that I was too weak for your family, that I had fallen apart without the Kingsley name to prop me up." Olivia's silence was answer enough. "So I came," Mitchell said simply. "I came to show you exactly what I've become, and to let my sons meet their father because despite everything, they deserve to know where they come from." She looked around the ballroom, meeting the eyes of guests who were watching like this was theater. They deserve to see this world, to understand their heritage, and to decide for themselves if they want any part of it. I'm not here for money. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because my children asked questions about their father, and I decided it was time to let them have answers. Mitchell crouched down between Paul and Peter, her arms around them. "Boys, this is your father. His name is Harry Kingsley. He doesn't know you yet, but that's not your fault. And this is your grandmother, Olivia. She's complicated." "Will she take us away from you?" Paul asked in a small voice. "No," Mitchell said fiercely. "Never, I promise you that." "Can she even try?" Peter wanted to know. Mitchell smiled grimly. "She can try. But I have full legal custody, established paternity, a stable home, a successful business, character witnesses, and 5 years of documentation. Any lawyer she hires will tell her she doesn't have a case." She stood, facing Olivia directly. "I don't need your money. I don't need your approval. I don't need anything from you except for you to stay away from my children unless you can treat them with the love and respect they deserve." Olivia's face was a study in rage and humiliation, her careful mask completely gone. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own home?" "It's not your home," Harry said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at him. He was still on his knees in front of the twins, but his voice was strong now, certain in a way Mitchell had never heard before. "It's the family estate. The family includes these boys now. My sons." His voice cracked on the last word. "My sons that I didn't know existed because my mother threatened their mother so severely that she fled in fear." "I didn't come here for your approval," she said clearly. "I don't need it. I came here because I decided my children deserve the truth, and the truth is that they come from this family. But they don't belong to it. They belong to themselves and to me, and maybe someday, if he earns it, to their father." She held out her hands, and Paul and Peter took them immediately, trusting her completely. "We're leaving now," Mitchell said. "Harry, my lawyer will contact you next week to discuss visitation arrangements. Olivia, if you try to contact me or my children directly, I'll file for a restraining order." She turned to go, but Harry's voice stopped her. "Wait." He moved closer, still keeping a respectful distance, his eyes fixed on the twins. May I talk to them, just for a moment?" Mitchell hesitated, looking down at her sons. "Boys, do you want to talk to your father?" Paul and Peter exchanged glances, having a silent conversation the way twins often did. Then Paul nodded slowly. Harry dropped to his knees again, bringing himself to their eye level. His hands were shaking, Mitchell noticed. The unflappable Harry Kingsley was coming apart at the seams. "Hi," he said softly. "My name is Harry." "We know," Peter said. "Mom told us about you." "She did." "She said you were kind when you met her," Paul offered, "and that you make bad jokes." Harry's laugh was half sob. "I do make bad jokes, the absolute worst." "Do you want to be our dad?" Peter asked with a child's directness. Harry's face crumpled. "More than anything in the world. Even though you didn't know about us." "Especially because I didn't know about you. I've missed 5 years of your lives, and I can't ever get that back, but if you'll let me, I want to be there for every day going forward." Paul considered this seriously. "Mom says you have to prove you're different now." "She's right," Harry said. "I have to prove that I'm brave enough to protect you, strong enough to put you first, smart enough to never make the same mistakes I made with your mom." "Are you sorry?" Peter asked. "For the mistakes?" "So sorry," Harry whispered. "The sorriest I've ever been about anything." Paul stepped forward then, close enough that he could have touched Harry, studying his face with intense concentration. "We do look the same," he said wonderingly. "Mom was right." "May I?" Harry asked hesitantly, holding out his hand. Paul looked at Mitchell, who nodded permission. Paul placed his small hand in Harry's much larger one, and Harry closed his fingers gently around it, tears streaming openly down his face now, not caring who saw, not caring about propriety or Kingsley dignity or any of the things that had once seemed so important. "Hi, Paul," he said brokenly. "I'm your dad." "Hi, Dad," Paul said, testing out the word. "I'm your son." Peter, not wanting to be left out, moved closer too. "I'm also your son." "You are," Harry agreed, reaching for Peter's hand as well. "You both are, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." Mitchell watched this scene with emotions she couldn't name. Grief for what should have been, hope for what might still be possible, protectiveness fierce enough to burn. "That's enough for tonight," she said gently. "Boys, say goodbye." "Goodbye, Dad," they said in unison, and Harry made a sound like his heart was breaking. Mitchell gathered her sons, steering them toward the exit. The crowd parted silently, everyone watching as she walked out of the ballroom with her head high and her children safe at her sides. But just before she reached the door, Harry's voice rang out across the ballroom, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I will never let my mother hurt them again." It was a declaration, a promise, a line drawn in marble and stone. Mitchell paused, looking back at him. Harry was standing now, facing his mother, and the expression on his face was one of absolute resolution. Olivia looked between her son and Mitchell, her carefully constructed world lying in ruins around her, her control completely shattered. And Mitchell didn't answer. She simply turned and walked out, her son's hands in hers, leaving Harry Kingsley to face the consequences of 5 years of cowardice and the terrifying possibility of redemption. Behind her she heard Olivia's voice, sharp and commanding. "Harry, don't be ridiculous. You can't possibly." And Harry's response, stronger than Mitchell had ever heard it. "I can, I will, and Mother, you're not welcome in their lives until you can apologize to Mitchell for what you did. Really apologize, not one of your polite society non-apologies, a real one." Mitchell didn't stay to hear Olivia's response. She walked out of Riverside Manor with her head held high, her children safe beside her, and the truth finally, irrevocably exposed. The war was just beginning. But tonight's battle, she had won. The ballroom had cleared considerably. Most guests had filtered out into the garden or adjacent rooms, drawn by the magnetic pull of scandal, but too polite, or too cowardly, to remain as direct witnesses to the Kingsley family's unraveling. Harry sat on the floor. Not on a chair, not standing with dignity intact, but on the actual marble floor of his mother's pristine ballroom, his expensive tuxedo crumpled, his face streaked with tears he'd stopped trying to hide. Paul and Peter stood before him, small and uncertain, their matching faces, his face tilted in identical expressions of cautious curiosity. "You're really our dad?" Paul asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harry nodded, unable to speak. His hand reached out, trembling, then fell back. He looked at Mitchell, his eyes pleading for permission, for guidance, for anything that might tell him how to navigate this impossible moment. Mitchell stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, watching. Her face was unreadable, not cold but carefully neutral, like a judge overseeing a trial where she held all the power but had not yet decided on the verdict. "You can touch them," she said quietly. "They're not made of glass." Harry's breath hitched. Slowly, carefully, as if approaching something sacred and fragile, he reached out again. This time his hand connected with Paul's shoulder, solid, real there. A sob broke from his chest. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." "Why didn't you know?" Peter asked with the devastating logic of childhood. "Didn't Mom tell you?" "I left before I could tell him," Mitchell answered, her voice steady. "I was scared. Your grandmother," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "wasn't a kind person to me. I thought if she knew about you, she might try to take you away, so I left to keep you safe." "That was smart," Paul said seriously, then looked back at Harry. "But you're not mean like her, right?" Harry shook his head violently. No, I'm not. I should have been stronger. I should have protected your mother. I failed her and I failed you and I—" His voice broke completely. Peter, the more empathetic of the twins, stepped forward and patted Harry's head awkwardly, the way one might comfort a crying dog. "It's okay. Mom says people make mistakes. She says what matters is if you do better." Harry pulled both boys into his arms then, holding them like they might disappear if he loosened his grip. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as 5 years of grief and regret and longing poured out of him. "They're Kingsley heirs," Olivia's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She'd finally pushed past Emily and stood at the edge of their small circle, her face a mask of controlled fury. "They have rights, inheritance, position. You can't simply—" "I can simply do whatever I want," Mitchell interrupted, her voice diamond hard. "They're my children. I raised them. I fed them and clothed them and loved them while you were busy congratulating yourself on driving me away. They're Kingsley heirs only if I say they are. Otherwise, they're just Peter and Paul Owens, and they'll have a perfectly happy life without this family's poison. You can't keep them from their heritage. Watch me." The two women locked eyes, and something passed between them. A recognition of mutual strength, of matched wills, of a battle that was far from over. "Mom," Peter tugged at Mitchell's dress. "I'm tired, can we go home?" Mitchell's expression softened immediately. "Of course, baby." She looked at Harry. "I'll call you, we'll arrange something, but right now we're leaving." Harry stood quickly. Can I at least have your number, your address, some way to reach you?" Mitchell hesitated, then pulled out her phone. They exchanged numbers in silence. The simple act weighted with years of separation and tentative hope. "Thank you," Harry whispered, "for coming, for showing them to me, for not hating me enough to keep them away forever." "I don't hate you, Harry," Mitchell said quietly. "I never did, I just couldn't survive you." She took her son's hands and walked toward the exit, her head high, her spine straight. Every remaining guest watched them go, the woman who'd left in shame returning in triumph, her children the ultimate proof that the Kingsleys didn't always win. The drive back was quiet. Both boys had fallen asleep before they hit the main road, exhausted by the emotional weight of the evening. Mitchell drove in silence, her mind replaying the night in fragments, Harry's face when he understood, Olivia's barely contained rage, the whispers and stares and the sweet, terrible victory of it all. She'd done it. She'd walked back into that house and emerged intact. More than intact, she'd emerged victorious. At home, she carried first Peter, then Paul to their beds, their small bodies heavy with sleep. She changed them into pajamas carefully, trying not to wake them, but Paul's eyes fluttered open as she pulled his covers up. "Mom," his voice was sleepy and small, "do you think Dad will really want to see us again?" "I do," Mitchell said, smoothing his hair back. "I think he'll want to see you very, very much." "Good," Paul mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. He seemed nice, sad but nice. Mitchell kissed his forehead and moved to Peter's bed, but he was already deeply asleep, one arm thrown over his head, his face peaceful. Her boys, Her perfect, brave, beautiful boys who'd walked into a lion's den because she'd asked them to, and had handled it with more grace than most adults could manage. She stood in their doorway for a long moment, just watching them breathe. Reflection. Later, Mitchell stood by her living room window, still in her navy dress, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The city lights stretched before her, each window a life she'd never know, each story as complicated as her own. 5 years ago, she'd stood in a different window in a different house, pregnant and terrified, trying to figure out how to survive. She'd had nothing. No money, no plan, no support system. Just determination and the fierce certainty that her children deserved better than what Olivia Kingsley's world would give them. And she'd done it. She'd built a life. She'd raised 2 incredible humans. She'd created a business, made friends, found her strength. Tonight hadn't been about revenge, though there had been satisfaction in watching Olivia's perfect world crack. It hadn't even been about Harry, really, though seeing his love for their sons had healed something in her she hadn't known was still broken. Tonight had been about dignity. About walking back into the place where she'd been made to feel worthless and proving, to them, to herself, that she wasn't, that she never had been. Mitchell took a sip of cold tea and smiled slightly at her reflection in the dark window. She'd reclaimed herself tonight, taken back the power Olivia had stolen, shown her sons that you could face your fears and survive them. Her phone buzzed on the side table. Mitchell glanced at it, expecting a text from Harry or maybe Emily, but the screen showed unknown number. She frowned and picked it up, answering. "Hello." Silence for a moment. Then a voice came through the line, cold, controlled, and absolutely lethal. "Enjoy your little victory, Mitchell, because I'm not finished with you yet." The call ended with a sharp click. Mitchell slowly lowered the phone, staring at it like it had transformed into a snake in her hand. "Olivia." The satisfaction from earlier drained away, replaced by something colder. Olivia Kingsley had been publicly humiliated, had her carefully constructed social position shattered, had lost control of her son and grandchildren all in one evening. And Olivia Kingsley was not the type of woman who accepted defeat gracefully. Mitchell set down her phone and looked back out at the city lights, but they seemed less peaceful now, more ominous. She'd won tonight's battle. She'd walked into enemy territory and emerged victorious. But for the first time since making the decision to return, Mitchell understood something with crystalline clarity. The war had only just begun. The battle between Mitchell and Olivia has only just begun. What will Olivia do to reclaim her power? Can Harry prove he's changed? And will Mitchell's hard-won peace be shattered? Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss part 2 of this gripping story. The stakes are about to get even higher. Trust me, you won't want to miss what Olivia has planned next. See you in the next episode. Like this story, drop a comment below and let me know what you think will happen next.